All right. Welcome, everyone. My name's Leo, and today I want to talk about what I consider society's biggest problem. All right. Now, when I say society's biggest problem, what's the first thing that comes to your head? Is it going to be the economy? Who's running the government? Corruption? Gosh, the list goes on and on. I want to outline what I think is the center or kind of the nexus of the issues we have today. So for me, this goes to Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And I would sort of liken this to an arrow where society is the archer. So the problem with society today is that it's aiming us in the wrong direction. And why this has to do with Maslow's hierarchy of needs is essentially society points us through a mythos that gives us a story about how we as individuals can self-actualize. Essentially, the American dream. Why it's a dream is because we all dream of self-actualizing, right? And long story short, the biggest problem with society is that the American dream is dead. But I want to get a little more into that because saying the American dream is dead doesn't really explain it. So let's talk about the mythos of the American dream. It's that any individual can work hard, in a fair marketplace, which will enable them to own property, which will then enable them to have a family. Now this story actually, the genius of it is how simple it is. If you consider the kinds of mythos that other societies have had, they're very convoluted. You know, they involve all these, you know, different gods and whatnot. You could say our God is the fair marketplace, maybe. I haven't thought about that too much, but going back to the story, and you know why the American dream is dead. Obviously, none of this stuff works for everybody or for enough people today. And what I also want to outline today is how I think the structure of this, while it's brilliant and simple, it's flawed. Which is why the American dream is dead. And quite honestly, so I really actually believe that the central mythos of any society is what leads to its downfall. Partially its success, but inevitably its downfall. Excuse me. So, what I want to argue for is that the relative success and inevitable downfall of the mythos or society. I hope you guys can see this okay. I know that I'm getting some glare, but we work with what we got. So the degree of the success and the degree of the downfall are centered around the mythos, right? And what I want to argue is that you can essentially say that sin, the degree of sin, determines the curve of downfall, or the curve of success and downfall of a society, right? And I really need to define sin here. Of course, it looks like sign. Isn't that funny? Sin is an archery term originally. Shout out to John Vervaeke for teaching me this. And what it means, and this is why I used the analogy of the mythos being the archer, right? And the aim of the mythos is the self-actualizing story, right? Society gives you a story with which, almost like an instruction manual, if you follow these directions, you will have what you want. You will actualize the kind of life you want. You will succeed, etc., right? Essentially, I mean, in biological terms, this means you will reproduce and have successful offspring. But this term essentially means to miss the mark. And this is what I want to argue, is that the degree to which the mythos of society sins, misses the mark, and we'll have to talk about what the bullseye is. We'll get into that. The degree to which the mythos of society misses the mark, it will determine the height, success, and the curve of the downfall. You might argue that in the past, natural disasters and climate change and all that kind of stuff has been the cause of this turn, and I can't really argue that, but I'll make my argument for why this is true either way. And really, on a personal level, how this story plays out in all our lives, and why it's sinning, why it's wrong, why is society wrong? All right. Why is society wrong? Well, in practical terms, it just means it fails too many people. Not enough people self-actualize. In very real terms, right? This is literally population collapse. Can I spell? I don't know. Think about it, right? Has the decline in birth rates and all the other metrics of success of a society, right? Your debt, your economy. I mean, as a millennial, I grew up the millennials, they grew up at this tipping point. And of course, what's important here is this just a temporary plateau and we can go back up? Is this going to be, we fall off a cliff and nuke ourselves? Or, is this going to be a slower curve? But anyway, to some extent, everybody alive right now is experiencing this turning point. And we all know it to be true, right? Like, is anybody going to argue with me that things have started going downhill in the last 20 years? I don't know. You could say 9/11 might be that point, or the 2008 financial collapse, actually. That's probably, I don't know. We can get into that, but the important thing is, I'm arguing, I think this is what's happening right now. I want to talk about it because if we can change the story remember the mythos? We can control this. I do believe, this is what I'm arguing, that the degree to which we have control over this story is the degree to which we have control over the direction of our future. Population collapse, right? Literally, when not enough people, I mean, think about this, right? In the context of the American dream, and why I said it's dead, is not enough of us, despite how hard we work, are able to control our destinies, become successful, buy a home, and have a family, and reproduce. So, why is this, right? Why? What? So if sin is missed aim, like the story of your society, how you can... All right, so missed aim, right? What am I talking about? I mean, it makes sense, right, in terms of, nobody fully agrees on what the story of society should be. So it makes sense that, we don't have some perfect story that self-actualizes everybody, and we should probably pump our brakes on thinking that we can get this perfect, right? We'll put an asterisk in that. So why sin, right? I'm using this deliberately, not just because the archery term is so spot on, but for me the spiritual reference of sin or metaphor of sin is the degree of missed aim. And so let me clarify here, because I know a lot of people are going to get turned off right now because their history and their problems with religion, right? And I want people to keep an open mind about this, because I am not trying to make a religious argument in the sense that the solution is to listen to what religions have. The mythos, let me just say that I think current religion offers bad solutions as well. Which is why I think this is self-evident, because if the argument is, in order to stop sinning, we need to go back to the way things were, or how ex-Christianity defines, sinning. If that's the argument, then why wasn't it successful in the first place? I think that speaks for itself, that the current religions misunderstand it equally, if not even worse, than our sort of secular society. Well, I think part of our problem is that we're not spiritual enough. And I think, okay, so that's getting a little more into the history. I need to explain the sin before I talk about what it means. So you can miss when you're aiming with a bow and you're staring straight down the arrow, and you line that up with the bullseye and you shoot, you're going to miss. So one way to miss is to have your aim be off, right? Wrong direction. But the other way is when you line things up perfectly in the visual realm, why do you miss? You miss because you fail to understand. The mechanics. And I really think so. I think going back to the degree to which societies succeed and the degree to which they fail, sometimes has to do with this. Some percentage of it is the wrong direction, and some percentage of it is the failure to understand the laws, right? And what do I mean by laws? I literally mean the spiritual laws of oops. Of nature. Or the universe. Oh my god, I can't spell. It's terrible. Oh well. And alright. we need to get into that. So, to reiterate, the degree to which society's biggest problem is the degree to which its mythos sins, fails to miss the mark, and not enough people self-actualize, not enough people succeed. And, you know, that, anyway. Sorry, I'm losing my train of thought, guys. So, the degree to which we sin, we have to figure out what percent of this is that society's aiming at the wrong thing, right? Like are we aiming high enough? Failing to understand the spiritual laws, I think, is really what's our problem at the moment. Hey, bud.
Dad?
Yeah.
I did an exercise and I watered the lawn.
Thank you. Yes. You can have some screen time. All right. That was my son. All right. So what? Okay. This is tough for me. It's tough for me to know where to start to tackle this problem, right? We know, or okay, from my arguing, sin is our problem. And we need to fix it is change the story. And this is happening right now. We're struggling over what the story is. Who are we? As a nation. Right? Are we a nation of immigrants? Or are we Americans? Where are we going? Destiny. What's our destiny? What's our purpose as a nation? And how we're going to do that. Strategy, policy, etc. Right? What's going to be our relationship? Does that make sense? Really, our relationship to our peers and let's in group and out group. Right? What's our relationship with the between individuals and between the nation, right? How do we relate to each other in the in group, and how do we relate anyone who's not in the group? And this is the story, right? The story is, who are we, where are we going, and how are we going to get there? And it's from the top to the bottom and the bottom to the top, right? How is every individual going to live their life, self-actualize, right? Or how is the nation, I mean, for Ukraine, right? Their story is how do we survive? Russia's got its own story. That's why they're attacking Ukraine, right? So we're in the midst of our story changing because the American dream is dead and it's no longer working for enough people, right? In this cycle of civilization is repeated itself so many times, right? The revolts, so the civil wars, etc. All right. So we understand now. I'm arguing that we need to find a story. We need to find a story. Realistically, that works for the most. I actually believe that there's a story that works for everybody. But I'm not. I'm also a realist. So, what's wrong with our story? Well, I'm going to argue right now it's corruption. Society's biggest problem is corruption. We have more than enough capacity, resources, technology. I mean, imagine where we would be if all the productivity lost to corruption went to scientific innovation. Right? We might be. Think about it, right? When science fiction first came out, in the 40s and 50s, and you had things like the Jetsons. Think about it. They thought that that today we would have flying cars and robot maids, and technology would be in the stars. And for them, I mean, what happened? We went to the moon in 1967 and we haven't been back. So something happened. There's a lot of stories, right, about why, but I think they really all break down to corruption. Corruption leads to, it's obvious. Corruption leads to the failure of the story, right? Because people work really hard and they lose too much, and there's you could have a 100-hour podcast about all the examples of corruption, but that's not as important as how do we solve it? How do we solve corruption? And you can almost think of this as cohesion. That these are on a scale with each other, right? The more cohesion we have as a society, the less corruption there is, and the better the story works for the most. And the degree to which the mythos supports cohesion is the degree it's inoculated to corruption. And I think, so, okay. Immediately, we see a problem. Because the first thing you think is that force is what causes cohesion. And I think that to a fair point, that's been true. But I want to argue that cohesion and the story, the greatest degree of cohesion we can get is through a mythos, a story that, what's the word I'm looking for? Convinces people. It convinces them not only to believe in the process story, right? I go to college, I get a job, I buy a house, I get married, I have kids, I have the 2.5 and the white picket fence, right? The degree that convinces people that it's possible, but also that they're capable of it, etc. But the mythos in the sense of not just the process, but the process for sure. I think that might be the biggest one. But identity. That this is much more powerful than force. I think when we talk about Jordan Peterson talks about all the time the chimp troops, where if you have a alpha male who rules by force, it doesn't last long. It happens, right? Genghis Khan, I mean, Alexander the Great, right? It happens, but what always happens to those people, right? The good troops, or the good alpha chimps, they convince their mates or their peers. They convince because I guess you could call it coercion, but it's I mean, how do you convince a romantic partner that you're worth it, right? You treat them well. And so I'm arguing that we need to defeat corruption by convincing the corrupted to change. I know, it's crazy. I know it's crazy because it's not how people try to root out corruption, right? But I want to argue that if we're not going to succeed as a society defeating corruption by force. It's not going to work. I think the history teaches us that any change by violence automatically installs corrupt people who seek power. What we need is to change the mythos. To convince the corrupted. But also to increase cohesion and improve everybody's lives. Right? So I literally think that if we can change the story of who we are, where we're going, what's our destiny, how are we going to get there, that will increase cohesion. It will convince the corrupted to not be so corrupted. Because what's the most important thing to the human being? Maslow's hierarchy of needs. What is that top tier? It's self-actualizing, but what do humans need to self-actualize? We need connection. And I'm arguing that if we find a mythos, if we change the mythos and find the true mythos, is what I ultimately want to argue for, that because humans ultimately seek connection above everything else, that will convince the corrupted to purify themselves, which will create cohesion, connection, improve everyone's lives. I really think with how prosperous we are, as corrupt as the world is, think about it. The world's so corrupt. Every country's corrupt, right? All politics are corrupt. And yet, I mean, we must be 10% efficient, 25%. I mean, how much? What do you really think? How efficient is society? How much effort do we lose with corruption? I mean, even if it was 50%, just think about where we could be if we weren't losing. If we could just improve that. Honestly, it doesn't have to be even perfect. Anything, societies have never been perfect, and yet that's not even the biggest deal, right? We just need it to be enough. We need it to be enough to let everyone, or let enough people self-actualize. Society can reproduce itself, etc. Right? I think I'll leave it there for now. Next time we'll talk about. I've got a lot to talk about, right? What that true mythos is, how this kind of breaks down. Anyway, I think we'll leave it there.